Inspired by my artwork that's in the exhibition, we're going to be making our own still life from some of the images from my one and just creating our own little still life collection of objects. Why I've chosen to do still life is that growing up in a European country, painting, the Renaissance, historical painting, sculpture, paintings of people in different textiles from across the world, from their colonising or exploits across the world. So really in the West it's sort of a way of showing, it's a way that rich white men have been able to show off their wealth, whether it's the exotic fruits that they're able to get or gold or just different objects that show their worldly and show off their wealth to their peers or what have you. The content isn't very relatable, but it's just art that I've been drawn towards. I like the detail, I like the light sources, I like the materials that are portrayed, the silks, the tapestries, the rugs, or the different golden objects, which are, you know, could be vases or coins or binoculars or just things like that. I like objects in my work, and a lot of the art that I like is figurative art, which is representing people or objects. So that's where some of my art comes from. The still life in particular is sort of just a framework. I'm thinking of us using that as a base level and putting our own emotions, interests, and meaning into those still lives that we create. The still life I created for the exhibition referenced a lot of art history throughout centuries, including an ancient Greek vase. So I kind of simplified a lot of the images that are on my piece, and I wanted us to, I'm using a light box here, but there's also, I've pretty much used a window to trace most of my art onto fabric. So we've got a calico fabric here and this A4 sheet. So what we're going to do is choose a few that you're interested in, really. Let's say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I can't remember how many I just counted, but there's 10 big-ish objects on here, and maybe we could just choose 4 or 5 objects in total to create a nice little still life here. I'm going to start off in the sort of background, and what we'll do is sort of centre it around the middle of the fabric if we can. Just keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do is trace these books. So I've got my compression gloves on, and this contraption which my mum helped make and friends helped make, that is just so that my hand doesn't get so cramped with when I'm drawing, so it's not so stable. But what you can see is you can go pretty rough. I mean, if you're using a window, obviously you're not going to be pressing super hard, but I'm not applying that much pressure. So we're just gonna trace these, and we're going to be overlapping some of the other images and creating, you know, a bit of depth and dimension in the group of objects. For me, the perspective and the like precision with the angles and everything like that doesn't matter so much to me. I mean, it might be jarring to others, but for me it's like, if you get the general vibe of what the objects are, I'm happy. That's sort of where I come from. So okay, we've forgotten a few lines there, always the case. add the diagonals. So we'll start off with the book. Okay, I forgot that one as well. Okay, so we've got the book. What I want to do is have a skull there as well, but I don't want it to face that the way it was. So what we're going to do is just flip the paper over and trace that way. We'll have the skull right in the middle. Drawing with this pencil is not the most it's not the most accurate, because obviously my grip is not in as much control as if I was just holding the pencil, but my hand would cramp if I was to do that. So it doesn't matter really at this point, as long as you've got the general outlines. This is what you're going to be using for guidance and guidelines to achieve the sewing that we want to do. So maybe whilst I'm doing this, I'll just say that the way that I embroider, usually I design on paper, or more recently on my iPad. Since chronic pain, I've sort of been drawing much more digitally and been improving my drawing skills that way. But anyway, what I do is I draw the concept on the piece of paper or whatever on my iPad, and then once I've got the image sorted in my mind, I know that I can embroider it. With not doing as much embroidery recently, the idea for this workshop was either we can do the embroidery how I do it, which is to outline do the lines in black and then fill in the colour, or I thought it would be kind of cool to like outline them in different colours and not fill them in. It depends what you want to do. If you, oh my gosh, my cat is coming. I don't know if you'll see her, but there's her tail. Yeah. Okay, maybe we just carry on. So yeah, I'm undecided how we're gonna fill the embroidery, but it's really up to you whether you want to sort of emulate my style with the filled in embroidery, or just do outlines, or maybe you have a different idea that you want to experiment with this. I'm also excited to see that. So okay, I want the globe. The skull that I just did, like the skull is very key to my brand and my business. It's part of my logo since 2012, so that'll be 10 years this year, this month actually. And so I always incorporate that because it's a globally recognized human image that, although some may relate to death completely, to me it's just person. It's not always necessarily representing death. In some contexts I draw like some waves here and put a wick and a flame, so it's a skull to be a sort of memorial image. Other times you can do, draw the skull with heart eyes for it to be sort of cartoonish. So I feel like the skull is just very versatile, and has been seen in art for thousands and thousands of years. This is something that I love, art history, it connects us worldwide. I especially love textiles for that reason, because humans for tens of thousands of years have used a needle and thread to create clothes, or they've woven to create nets and fishing nets and stuff like that. So even when it's not for art purposes, like, these techniques have been used, which I like. Okay, so we've got the books, the skull, you can always go over a little bit if you've not done it. Very clear. Sometimes it's hard to see, plus it's light out, because usually I probably do this in the dark and put the light on every so often to see what I'm doing, but because I want you to be able to see what I'm tracing, of doing it in daylight. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, I think I'm going to put a phone here. And then again, I don't like the angle that it's there naturally, so what I'm going to do is just rotate the worksheet and just have it at a bit of an angle. Maybe we'll put it off center here so it balances it out, and then we'll have some little trinket here or something to just make the scene a bit more balanced. I like mixing the modern day, you know, phone technology with the historical objects on here. Some people do portraits of people more, whereas I guess I like to look at the objects that sort of make up everyday life. The objects that are around you say a lot about you, so, or people's possessions, I should say. So I'm gonna keep these little love hearts here. I like to make real life setups. Oh gosh, that heart was super wonky. I like the everyday objects, but with a surrealist, dreamy element maybe. Like, obviously these are just little hearts here, but I like having elements of nature or mood that are not necessarily something you would see in real life with your own eyes, but something that is a bit more imaginative or conceptual. So that's why I like having the little phone there with the hearts. So I think, should we have a few candles? I like the idea of the lock. Where do I put the ashtray? The ashtray could be kind of cool. It kind of fits there nicely. As I'm just thinking of this right now, a good way to do this might be for us to cut the images that we want out and then sellotaping them, or just arranging them in a way so that we know before we start drawing, because for me, I hate drawing straight onto it, onto the fabric, because I've done that so many times and I've ended up just having to start all over again because I've either done it too small or not left enough room in some way. So I think even though I've just done this bit of the tutorial, oh my gosh, it's not coming out at all. Okay, it's okay to be hard with it because this is going to be covered with your thread. Okay, so now maybe we just put this little lock in the front, or a little candle. Just draw a little candle. First things first, a bit about our material. So embroidery thread is made up of 6 strands. We're going to just cut a length of it at the moment, not longer than the length of one of your arms, because otherwise it will get knotted or just be difficult to manage. So what we do now that we've got this length of thread is we're going to split it into 2. So usually I use just 2, and what you're going to do is take the 2 and then take the remaining 4, and then what I do is just put my finger with the opposite hand and coax it apart. So you'll see that the rest of the thread is kind of going crazy, but so there we go, we've got our strand, which is made up of 2 individual threads now. And the first thing that we're going to do is learn how to thread the needle. So what most people do is they get the needle and they try and stick it in the hole like this, which is very difficult. What I do is I push the thread right in between my fingers, so you can just see the tiniest amount, and then you just force the thread into the hole. So it's simply, you're just literally guiding the thread into there. That is the easiest way to thread a needle. And then what we're going to do is tie a little knot right at the end of the thread. That didn't look very substantial, but there we go. So we've separated the thread and then we've now threaded the needle. Most of the threads are made up of 6 thread. The skein of thread is made up of 6 strands, as I've just said, and most of the embroidery that I do is only using 2 strands. If you wanted to make a thicker line, you can use 3 strands, you know, split that in half, the original thread in half. If you want to do super fine details, you can use 1 individual thread, which is also what I do. So for the purposes of this tutorial and setup, I am doing this upside down, so hopefully that's okay. But yeah, we're going to start with the outline, and we're going to be doing this little candle. There's cars driving past, so hopefully that is not too loud. I'll just bear that in mind whilst I'm giving the instructions. What we do, now that we've knotted the thread, is we're going to bring, we start at the back, and you can sort of guide where you want to go by seeing where the needle is. You can hold it like this and literally guide it. You can see where it is. So what we'll do is we'll start at one of the corners and we'll just bring the needle up through the fabric, and when you have a straight line here, you can just do 1 massive stitch there, because stitches are basically straight lines, and when we do these curves we'll be achieving that by creating lots of small straight lines to create a curve. But when we're met with literally a straight line here, you can just go straight with 1 stitch. There we go. When we get to the other side here, we'll split it into 2 just so that you can see for preference, because sometimes I would do this in 1 and other times I would do it in 2 just so that it feels a bit more secure, because this it's just, you know, 1 stitch here, so when this fabric is moved, it may buckle or it just won't look as neat as it does now. So let me just get my hair out of the way. What we're going to do is, again, sussing out where we want to put our next step whilst the thread is underneath. And this time, because we're okay, let's go this way. We're trying to create a circular edge here, so we'll have to do that by creating small stitches. So we'll start off here and go back into the stitch, the previous stitch. So what we'll see is just go right next to it, just less than half a centimetre, and then we're going to go back into that stitch that we just did. And this is called back stitch because we're going back into the hole that we just came up through. So up through the back and back into that hole that we just created. Sometimes it can look a bit too angular because we've done the stitches too long on a curved edge, if that makes sense. So here I'm doing an even smaller stitch and then going back there into that hole that was just created. An even tinier stitch here to get that last bit of the most circular edge of the top of the candle. So here, as I said, we're going to split this side into two now, just so that you can see. And actually the drawing, you can see that the bottom of the candle is actually a different circular angle to the top of the candle. So we're just going to stick to the drawing and not try and correct that or anything. But as you can see, we go up through the back, pull the needle out, and then we're going to go back into the hole where the line we've just created is. And even this way, coming back on itself now, we can put the needle back into this hole, although it's a little bit fiddly to do that way. Okay, we won't do it that way. It's a little bit too fiddly. And then at the bottom here, we're just going to do a sort of straight across to replicate this line straight across here. Almost done with the bottom of this. And over the course of this video tutorial, we will complete this candle. Okay, so this has not come straight out of the exact same line where we started off, but hopefully that will look okay. Okay. We're getting going here. It's a bit difficult for me to stand up and sew like this, but it creates the best angle. Okay, so what we're going to do, we've finished up just here. And what we're going to do is just bring the needle up through a different area where we want to start through the back, and you can see there's no mess or anything there. And we're just going to create tiny little stitches to try to create this curved part of the candle. I guess one way to equate the stitches is to think about a digital clock that is made up of pixels, and the numbers are made up of straight lines, and it looks very boxy. So this is like we're making the image out of a lot smaller straight lines to create the curve. And again, just guide it through the back with the finger. You're not doing any damage. You're literally just using the tools that you have to guide you. Okay, so here we've got a little semicircle, and we're going to make that with 3 stitches. So one at a slight diagonal here, then a tiny little one for the middle, and then another tiny little stitch there, and we've created that little curve. So the last bit now, we'll do the wick and outline the flame. You know, I've been doing this for 10 years now, so a lot of this is practice and just putting in the hours, really. It does take time. It is a labour-intensive medium where you're not going to see the results immediately and you're going to have to chug away. But it is super rewarding, and this is how I start off with the outlining. So as you can see with the flame, it's a very small curve, very, very slight changes. So we're just going to again keep making that curve with the small straight stitches coming up through the fabric and back into that hole that we've just created. Here we can see it's sort of a straight line, so we're just going to finish that top bit here with 1 stitch. Perfect, and then we can just go straight down here, almost at a right angle, and go back into that top hole there. And you know, you can always just, if you make a mistake, you can always just take the needle out and unpick the stitch. Good. That's what I've loved about embroidery is, you know, I guess I wasn't very confident growing up, and the fact that you can undo the stitch just gave me that extra bit of reassurance, and in a way that you can't rub out a pen or paint, you know, where it's a lot more difficult to. And then I think we'll finish with just 1 last stitch there. So that is how we outline. Now we're going to do satin stitch, which again is with 2 individual strands of thread knotted at the end. And we're going to use our needle as a guidance to just bring us right inside the black outline that we've just been doing. And satin stitch, I use it to fill flat spaces. Sorry, I thought my cat was coming in. So we're just literally doing straight lines parallel to each other, and what you're going to do is bring the needle up through the fabric just next to where you have just done a stitch, just a little bit of a gap in between. You're not trying to be super precise, other than just getting the needle right next to the black line. So we're going to keep doing that until we get to the other end. Just creating long stitches, back and forth. Just keeping them parallel to each other. Oh. And once we get to the other end, we're literally going to be doing the exact same thing, but going backwards. So with the way that we've been doing it, this is where we start. This is the thread that we started, so we can just chop that off a little bit so that it doesn't get in the way. But as you can see, there's very minimal pink thread back there, but that's because we're going literally just a tiny little bit next to the stitch where we've just done, so it creates a lot less excess thread or bulk at the back, and you're not wasting thread. Okay, so we just finished our stitch here, and what we're going to do is we're going to try to fill these gaps, you know, going back and forth basically. I found that when you try and get all of your stitches literally row by row next to each other, it is just so hard to be precise, and it's just really long to just always be trying to get it, you know, right next to each other. So I've just found that this technique of sort of going back and forth in between the stitches to be a lot faster, and you see the space filling up a lot quicker than if you were to just try and get the stitches packed up, I guess, like sardines next to each other all in one go. But that's just how I've found the technique useful over the years, as I've been filling spaces and doing different commissions, wondering like, oh god, how am I going to fill this so quickly? And yeah, I've just found this technique to be the easiest. So we've got a little bit of the black thread coming from the back, which can be annoying, but we'll leave that for now. So we're just going to keep going, and sometimes it's just about poking and finding the right space, the right angle. So I've chosen satin stitch for this section because, as you see, it's a flat area and it makes sense for it to be just sort of one solid block of colour. With some of the other stitches you can create shading, and so those are better for different areas, such as the flame, which we're going to do next. Usually my face is a lot closer to the fabric, but as I'm recording this, I don't want the top of my head in the video, so it may not be as super precise as I'm used to, but it's still displaying the technique that I want to show you, which is using these long stitches to fill a space. And you can also use your, when you get to this point, you can use your needle as a guidance to get you to where you need to go, so that you're not crossing over, or use your thread like this as well. You can use that as a guide. So obviously we don't want to make a diagonal stitch there, we want to keep it in line with the rest of them. So we can use that and get the area filled. Hopefully you can see the space building up now a bit more. It's really just about sandwiching, squishing in those last stitches so that the area is really filled with your satin stitch. And here we're going to just go a bit more to the side until we're filled up, until the section's filled up. Now you could obviously fill this in a different way. You could even have the lines going across ways and then, you know, have them following the line of this needle up until this point, and then just doing smaller stitches to fill the bottom area of the candle. So the direction really is part of your decision making as well. So what we do after we finished using thread is we flip over our embroidery. What I do is just go underneath some of the thread that you've been using, just go underneath it, literally wrap it round to create a bit of a lock there and make it secure. One last one for good measure, and we just cut it. So I think what we'll do is use a bit of satin stitch to fill the top layer of the candle. So again, we've got the 4 strands in the back of your hand, and then the 2 strands in between your thumb and index finger, and then you're going to put your other hand in between and just guide your hand and the hand through the thread. And if it gets a bit knotty at the end, usually it will just come undone. So we've got we'll do my needle technique. The thread is just there, and we're going to force the thread through. And tie a little knot in the end. So with this section, what I'll usually do is start from sort of the middle, or where we've already got an outline, and then push outwards in a different direction. So this space is it's a bit less straightforward with the filling, because it's got different outlines, it's not just one area. I don't even know if this is actually satin stitch that we're doing, because it's not going all the way through, but we're just going to fill the area in a different way, in a different direction. And we're going to keep using the outlines that we've embroidered previously as our guide, butting up against that, using that as literally our outline. When you put the thread in different directions, it creates that sort of different dynamic, can create different textures, breaks up the image from just being one direction. It can add different depth. And here I've just gone with a slightly lighter pink. But really, you can just use whatever colours, whatever comes to your imagination. It doesn't have to follow any rules. And filling in these little tiny gaps can be a bit fiddly, but over the years and with practice, it's easier to get those awkward spaces. There we go, we've got half done. And now for the other side. So I'm going to again start just here with where we've put one stitch and start from the middle. And you're always using your finger around in the back of the fabric to guide you, because that's how you know where you want the needle to come out. Go. So we're almost finished filling this gap now. And really, it doesn't matter if every area is covered. To me, the most important thing is that the image is there and it's clear what you are trying to portray. So it doesn't really matter if there's a little bit of fabric showing through, or if you've done the stitch in a different direction to what you wanted it to be in. Thread sort of has a mind of its own, it's not a pencil, it's not going to play by the rules. It might not sometimes, it might get stuck, it might jam, so you've kind of got to adapt and just get used to using this type of material. But there you go. We've done satin stitch, we've done back stitch, and lastly we're going to have split stitch. And again, we're just going to use the stitches that we've already got to just poke our needle under there and use that as our locking of the thread so that it doesn't break or come undone. The final part of the video tutorial we'll be doing is going to be split stitch. So split stitch is what I use to somewhat blend, and also it just creates a different texture. Now the space we're going to be using for is the flame, so there's going to be some blending there and we'll do our best. So we'll start again off with just threading the end of the needle, threading the end of the thread and then we're gonna guide our needle through the back of the fabric. For this particular stitch, we're just going to follow along the line that we've created there in black. And what we're going to do is put the needle up through that same stitch. So as you can see, we're about halfway through the stitch, a little bit closer to the bottom edge, and we're going to bring the needle up through there. So what that does is, rather than just being completely parallel to each other, the stitches combine and integrate. And we're going to go on the other side of this, because we're going to blend the flame red to orange to yellow in the center. And again, we're just going to come halfway through the stitch. You can do this no matter how long the stitch is. I mean, if it's really, really tiny, if it's a millimeter, it's going to be difficult and kind of pointless to do the split stitch, but it just, I don't know how to describe it, it just gives it this flow. We're going to do very little red, we're just going to keep it outlined, I think about that much. And then we're going to do some orange. Again, the way we finish thread is just doing a stitch in the same place, kind of going underneath the outline and just tacking it there and giving it a little trim. Once again, my trick for threading the needle. We've got the edge of the thread right between my fingers. And then we're going to force, we're going to force the thread through the needle well. Okay, so we're going to start this one by coming just inside that red stitch. And we can do another one just inside this. And then what we're going to do is just go next to it, because we want to start a new line inside, so we're not going to go into any stitches at the moment. Just inside that red. And then we're going to go along this side. With flames, I've just gone for like bright red, orange and yellow, but sometimes you might want to use two different shades of orange, one that's a bit more yellow tone and one that's a bit more red tone, so that there's a bit more of a blend in there. So I think we can leave that there, and we'll finally add the yellow. To finish that off. So you can use the pink stitches that you've already done to secure those in tightly. If you're wondering what kind of contraption I have a wooden frame which holds the embroidery hoop, and you can get various ones. My one in particular is a floor length one. You can get excuse me, ones for your lap, and they very much come in handy because sometimes it hurts your hand to hold the embroidery hoop for too long, but having a hoop is much better than just trying to sew onto fabric by itself, because the hoop creates tension, and it pulls the fabric so that you've got this tension, and so that the needle and thread doesn't make your stitches all floppy. So what we're going to do, we'll carry on with the effect that we, instead of just completely going straight to cover that space like we did here, we're going to carry on filling the area within the shape of the flame, because I think really that's what gives it the texture. And you know, a flame is an organic moving thing. It doesn't look absolutely perfect. It moves, it changes colour, and that's why this particular stitch is a good way to represent it. And that's what part of it makes sewing interesting to me, is how you're going to use the different textures, the different stitches to create texture, to create interest. You can use French knots to create hair texture, or textures in food, which are just some of the ways I've used different stitches. I think that's coming together nicely. Bear in mind, this will be my 10th year doing embroidery, so it's a lot of practice. It's been an obsession of mine since I was 17, and if you persevere, if you just do a little bit every day, who knows how much progress you'll be able to make, you know? Okay, we can go more straight down now because the space is so tiny. There we go. There's your split stitch flame.